Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
With the commentator for the Mail on Sunday, Dan Hodges, and the writer Ellie Mae O'Hagan. So hello to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on those front pages, and let's start with the Observer, which reports on a leading millionaire Brexit donor who has pledged to fund a campaign to oust almost 140 pro-Remain MPs in an attempt to ensure that there's no backsliding, as he says, after the election. The NHS cyber attack is a prominent theme across tomorrow's newspapers as well. The Telegraph comments on the chaos that it's caused. The Mail on Sunday claims the NHS was subject to 66 cyber attacks last year, none of which were reported. The Prime Minister is pledging a council house revolution. That's in the Sunday Times. And she could be on course to win 398 seats at next month's election. That's according to The Express. The Daily Star leads with the Beckham families, meanwhile, their most recent purchase, they say. So plenty to talk about there with Dan Hodges and Ellie Mae O'Hagan. And it's actually to the Sunday Telegraph that we're turning first of all, I think. And it's not their main story, am I right? This is the story in the bottom right-hand corner there, and the announcement from Labour on what it's going to do about raising tax from the city.
Yeah, well, we're being very current. This is hot off the press. It was actually only released at 10 o'clock, so it's made the Telegraph. So basically, I think the pledge is that they would, first of all, crack down on tax avoidance by closing loopholes for hedge funds and banks, but that they would also introduce what's called a Robin Hood tax, because the idea is that it takes from the rich and gives to the poor. And it's essentially a 0.5% on all financial transactions, but it's not between ordinary people, it's between financial institutions like banks. And that 0.5% will go on to fund public services and things that ordinary people use. So that's the idea behind it.
Well, yes, and they're talking about raising £26 billion over the course of the Parliament. I mean, that sounds like a lot of money. Is this a good idea, do you think?
No, I think it's a crazy idea. I mean, they're calling it a Robin Hood tax. I think it's more of a Sheriff of Nottingham tax. I mean, you have to. This is the thing that frustrates me about the Labour Party. I mean, you have to think about the context in which this election is being fought. In 2 years' time, in less than 2 years' time, we are going to leave the European Union. All parties now, with the exception, possibly the exception of the Lib Dems, all parties now agree with this. And when that happens, the United Kingdom is going to face one of the toughest economic challenges it's faced since the war. And the idea that as we, in a sense, step off that particular cliff, we should be burdening British business and the British business community with a £26 billion tax albatross, if you like, around its neck is mad. And I understand this stuff is popular, and I understand, you know, nobody ever lost an election through bashing the bankers, and I understand Jeremy Corbyn's not going to be Prime Minister, it's not going to be implemented. But sending the message that Britain post-Brexit is a country that wants to crack down on the bankers and crack down on business is absolutely nuts. And
the city does generate a lot of money for the economy, doesn't it? I think Sadiq Khan is not a mad fan of this particular policy, and Ed Balls and Alistair Darling in the past weren't keen as well. So has Dan got a point there? It is given the uncertainties around the financial institutions in the city post-Brexit, is it a good policy for a time like this?
Absolutely, Brexit is going to cause a lot of uncertainty. I totally agree with that. And actually, that uncertainty and the economic downturn that most economists think will happen as a result of leaving the single market will hit the pockets of ordinary people, not banks. And that's why banks should be taxed a tiny amount of money. 0.5%, it's a tiny amount of money to them, but it will mean a lot to ordinary people who will benefit from a redistribution of wealth, which is what essentially, that's why it's called Robin Hood tax. And it is a good thing. And, you know, the banks did cause a financial crisis in this country. They haven't really had many repercussions from that. all this tax says is let's just take a tiny, tiny little bit from them and give it back to ordinary people who are really going to need it in the next couple of years.
And that's going to appeal to a lot of people, isn't it? There are going to be a swathe of people who feel that the bankers got off lightly, that they were bailed out by the government, and that the rich haven't suffered at all, and the poorer elements of society have been the ones that have suffered, and that this will appeal, won't it?
Well, superficially, I mean, I think, obviously, as I said, bashing the bankers, as we know, is very popular. But the reality is, as I said, once we enter that sort of post-Brexit scenario, if the banks are turning away, if the banks are leaving, if London's role as the financial centre of Europe is eroded, then that's something that's going to affect everyone. It's not just going to affect the bankers, it's going to affect absolutely everybody in this country in a very, very negative way.
If the banks leave, it won't be because of a Robin Hood tax. It will be because of Brexit means that it will be harder for them to trade in this country. It won't be because they've been taxed more. They'll probably move to countries where they'll end up getting taxed more heavily than they are here. In fact, Britain was often the country in the EU that tried to resist more progressive tax measures. So the idea that banks would move because of a Robin Hood tax is just scaremongering. This is a good idea, and I'm glad that Labour have introduced it.
I think we might have to agree to disagree on this one, shall we?
And
move on.
Just for a change.
Okay. You've picked out a story on page 9. There's a double-page spread there. But it's actually the article on the right-hand side of that you particularly wanted to focus on, I think. Is that right? Yeah. About Boris Johnson. Yeah,
this is an interesting one from my colleagues Leno and Brendan Carlin, which is about Boris, who apparently has been begging Theresa May not to sack him, and has been very concerned that he could be for the chop after the election. Now, according to the story, he's been given he's been given reassurances about his position, but as somebody mentions in the piece, if Theresa May wins the election with the sort of majority we're looking at, then she's got a free hand to do whatever she wants. And I think one of the really interesting things is, obviously, in the last election, Boris was seen very much as an asset to the Conservative Party. We saw him out on the campaign trail. He was very much at the forefront of this campaign. In this campaign, he's been very much sort of pulled into the background, and the reason for that is obviously that, in a sense, it is no longer the Conservative Party campaign, it is now the Theresa May campaign. I mean, we saw this week, you know, the bus going around with Theresa May emblazoned on the side. I think there's some tiny lettering
on the door, I think it says the Conservatives.
Stuck under the wheel arch, which says Conservative Party, if you can see it. And that's just the nature of the campaign. And I do think, obviously, Theresa May's going to win. She's going to win with a huge majority. But I do think there's going to be a little bit of resentment building up within the cabinet about how, essentially, they've all been sort of pushed to the background, and it's a one-woman show.
But that does seem to be the strategy, doesn't it? To make it about Theresa May. Do you think that's going to work? Is it a good idea to make it all about her, do you think? From their point of view, obviously, you wouldn't particularly want them to be successful. But
no, I mean, I think if I was a Tory strategist, I would probably suggest the same thing, because the Conservative Party is not liked in many parts of Britain because of its previous policies. So probably should remind your viewers that it will be the Conservative Party that will get into power, not just Theresa May. We're not electing a president, we will be electing a party. So if she wins, it will be a party that gets into power, and there's not really much getting around that. But I also think, you know, her record, and as an individual, I'm not really very happy with her becoming Prime Minister or being Prime Minister as she is now, because her record in the Home Office was really bad. I mean, not only was she actually quite cruel, she also had a habit of misrepresenting facts, and then when things blew up in her face, she went to ground. And I think, you know, what we were talking about earlier with the NHS security issue, the fact that she, you know, you were saying it's a rare thing for her to sort of come out in public and talk about it, and also the health secretary's been on the down low. I think, you know, she's actually just not very good at taking responsibility for her actions. Obviously I don't like the Conservative Party, but I also am not very enthusiastic about her as a Prime Minister, as an individual.
I'm just going to zoom out on that double-page spread, because that's not the first time that there have been comparisons made to Margaret Thatcher, are there? In that main headline, Theresa set to outdo Maggie. I mean, is she trying to channel a bit of Margaret Thatcher, do you think, in her campaigning? Well, yes. I mean, obviously, if you remember famously in her first sort of Prime Minister's questions, she sort of leant towards Jeremy Corbyn and said, "Remind you of anyone?" And of course, that's who she was looking to
she was looking to channel. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I mean, it's not inconceivable, obviously, as we see there, that she could eclipse Margaret Thatcher. Whether, however, she has, if you like, the durability of Margaret Thatcher and the desire to go on and on once we win the next election, on that I'm a bit more sceptical, I have to say. OK,
let's move on to the front of the Observer, shall we? Because their main story, it looks enormous there, we go, is about a donor. Well, explain to us what it is. It's about a donor who's trying to make sure that there are Brexit MPs in position and is using his money to help that. Is that right? Yeah,
it's somebody called Jeremy Hoskin, who is a city asset manager who apparently is going to spend a significant element of his fortune into targeting those, what he regards as Remain MPs, to ensure there's what he says is no backsliding on Brexit after the election. I mean, I'd make a number of points. I mean, firstly, I don't think the spectacle of I presume, a multimillionaire like this trying to interfere in the election is necessarily something that most voters would welcome. But then multimillionaires can give their money to different parties. Yeah, they can. They can. But I mean, he seems to be targeting specific MPs, and I think I'm not entirely sure that would go down well in the constituencies of those MPs who are targeted. I mean, the other thing I would say to Jeremy Hoskin, I'm not entirely sure why he's wasting his money, given the polls we've just seen. I mean, I think you know, a lot of those MPs are going to be losing their seats anyway. But frankly, I do think it sort of leaves a sort of quite nasty taste in your mouth when you have individuals essentially trying to sort of buy influence in the election in such an overt way. And yet, I guess the voters might say, well, we have the facts in front of us and we can make a decision on which candidate we want. You know, how much difference will that kind of money make?
I think money does make a lot of difference, unfortunately. And it's a rare moment of agreement between me and Dan, because I do agree with him that
I might have to change my view now, I think.
So that's how I get you to change your mind. And I think, you know, what I would say is that if he wants to make sure that Remain MPs lose their seat, he should probably start in Maidenhead, because Theresa May did back the Remain campaign, as we know. So I would suggest he starts there.
OK, well, we're going to take a break, but we are going to return to more politics. Will Jeremy Corbyn cling on as Labour leader, even if his party loses the election? Apparently, it depends on who you ask. Welcome back to the press preview, where we're taking a look at the papers tonight with commentator for the Mail on Sunday, Dan Hodges, and the writer Ellie Mae O'Hagan. And first of all, we're going to talk about Jeremy Corbyn. So let me just find the right article. It's not that one, but that's a little tease ahead to what we're doing next. We're talking about whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is likely to stay on regardless of how he does in the election. Why don't you get us started while I find this article?
Well, when it comes up, it's basically an article which says that moderate Labour MPs are preparing to move against Jeremy Corbyn almost as soon as the polls close, and I think there is potentially something in that. But there's also a more interesting issue about how Jeremy Corbyn and those around Jeremy Corbyn are going to try and play things after the election. It's actually something I've written about in my column tomorrow, available at all good newsagents. And it's...
You promised me you weren't going to push your column.
I know, but I lied. And basically, my understanding is what's happening is even those around Jeremy Corbyn understand that once the election's over, it is only a matter of time before Jeremy Corbyn finally goes. And what they're now what they're now talking about is the concept of constructing Corbynism without Corbyn. So what you will see them saying is, we went into the election campaign, we came up with some very good policies. A number of those policies were very popular. Jeremy Corbyn, he's a man of principle, but he's not really a retail politician. He had all these people against him in his own party. He had the press against him. He came up a bit short. And now what we've got to do is we've got to continue the project. We've got to continue the project without Jeremy himself, but Corbynism and the principles and values he underpins have to remain part of the Labour Party. And I think when the election's out of the way, that's the way we're going to start. We're going to start to see the Corbynites pushing things.
It's actually an article inside the Express. I've only got the front cover, but it's inside the paper. But is that how you see things playing out?
I have to admit, I don't really know. I think that what's going to happen in the Labour Party, it just is completely dependent on the results of the election. Because it depends on what the Labour Party looks like after the election very much depends on who keeps their seats and who doesn't.
So Labour losing isn't enough for him to go?
You know, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't feel connected enough to. I don't feel like I have a special insight into the Corbyn team to know whether it will be enough for him to. Obviously, he's got the support of the membership. I mean, that's really clear. Whether if Labour lose, will he continue to have the support of the membership? Now, that's the question, really, because if there's another leadership competition, he will automatically be on the ballot. We know that already. And so really the question is, will the members vote for him? And I really just don't know what the answer to that is. So I don't really have, I thought we might have a big argument about this, but I don't really have any special insight into that. I think it all depends on how the membership feels after the election. Will they want, you know, what will the result be? Will they want him to, if it's a loss, will they want him to stay on as leader? And I think the answers to those questions will determine how it plays out.
I mean, certainly the Corbynites themselves are trying to set a couple of different benchmarks. One is whether or not, in terms of the Tory majority, it's below, I think it was the 104 seats majority that Margaret Thatcher secured in 1987. If they fall below that, they will say he's done better than Neil Kinnock. And the other key thing
it does rely on if there's a leadership competition, it does depend on what the members want, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, but I'm just saying from the Corbynites' perspective, the other benchmark they're setting is whether or not they can secure 31% of the vote, which would be similar to what Ed Miliband secured last time. And they'll use that as to say that given all the difficult circumstances, that's actually a good result. But you're right. The question is, how will Labour Party members see it? Now, I think that when Labour does suffer the sort of defeat it's going to suffer, I think there will be a sense of the martyrdom of Jeremy, and the members may well instinctively rally round. But also, I think the losses will be on such a scale that the idea of him staying on for the long term is just what won't be conceivable, even to die-hard Corbynites. OK,
let's move on. Sorry to... Do you want to have a very quick word? But
I just wanted to make the point that, you know, you were sort of talking about it as though it's some conspiracy, but as we discussed earlier, Labour's manifesto is very, very popular with the public. So I think it's totally reasonable that the Labour Party should retain that manifesto, even if there's a change of leader. I don't think there's anything conspiratorial about that. OK, let's whiz on to a story inside the Express. There's a lot about the NHS because of the cyber attack, but you've picked out a story about a strike being threatened by nurses. Yeah, well, this is quite close to my heart. My mum's a nurse. Well, she's retired now, but she was a nurse for 45 years. And you know, she went into a hospital on the day that she was married to show the patients her wedding dress to cheer them up. And she used to get me as a kid to make patients Christmas cards to sort of cheer them up. You know, like, the nurses really do go above and beyond what they're expected to do for their patients. In my experience of having almost grown up in a hospital from you know, spent there so much time there as a kid. And they're really, the lack of funding in the NHS is really taking a toll at the moment. I mean, I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago, and, you know, you had things like patients lying in bed naked because there wasn't any clean linen in the hospital, or a patient suffering a hemorrhage when being transported from one hospital to another.
I don't want to cut in when you're talking about those experiences, but we have only got 20 seconds left, so but it'd be a big deal if nurses did strike. Would there be
no? It would be a big deal, and obviously agree with Ellie. I mean, obviously we know all the great work that nurses do, but I don't think the sort of problems that you've talked about there and the problems for patients will be alleviated by nurses withdrawing their labour. I think that would be a very, very serious
But they're desperate.
mistake.
They've been pushed into that by difficult circumstances.
I'm relieved to see that you're disagreeing again at the end, and we've come back to the status quo. Yeah. We must leave it there, though. Dan Hodges, Ellie Mayo-Hagan, lovely to see you both.
Thank you.
So, as usual, to the papers, and I'm starting with that NHS story. It's all over many of the papers. The Mail on Sunday said there were 66 alerts to the NHS, but nothing was done before the cyber attacks. The Sunday Telegraph has the same story there. NHS cyber chaos hits thousands of patients, and lots of political stories as well, as you'd expect. The Sunday Times, Harry Styles is apparently against Brexit. Why we need to know this, I don't know, but the Sunday Times feels we do. And they've splashed on Theresa May's pledge on a council house revolution, they say. So that'll be interesting to talk about. Now, lots of Remainers are targeting pro-Brexit MPs, we're told, in this election, trying to knock them out. Here's the opposite happening, according to The Observer. A millionaire Brexit donor is targeting 140 pro-Remain MPs, so we get a very pro-Brexit parliament. So lots of local stories there to follow up. And Sun Express, therefore, made to smash Maggie record, it says. Perhaps optimistically, we will see. Now, we're going to start, I think, with the big cyber story, which is really the story of the week.
Yes, The Observer, that, yes, unless you've been locked in a cupboard, you will, over the last 24 hours, you'll know that the NHS has been the victim of a cyber attack, as have other organisations worldwide. It's called Eternal Blue. Sounds like a paint colour.
Oh, maybe it sounds like Mrs. May.
Yes, it's some malware software. Anyway.
And it was originally designed by the NSA in the States,
yes,
and possibly by our own spooks as well, working with them. So it's a piece of, as it were, government's own software, which has been nabbed and then turned against
Which, of course,
everyone.
Microsoft had said, issued a warning about in March and had put out there ways to thwart it, but the NHS didn't do it, or a lot of them didn't do it. And it's like all of us, you know, you don't get your house secured, you don't want to spend the money until you get burgled, yes, and then you do it. Yeah. But there's a really good piece here, Charles Arthur, technology writer, and he's sort of taking a little bit of the mickey out of Amber Rudd, I have to say, but he said she was on the radio yesterday. Patients have been inconvenienced, but no patient data has been accessed, and the NHS is brilliantly managing through this. But he says, unfortunately, also, the NHS staff can't access the data. But he says Rudd can burble on as much as she wants, but the £1 billion put in is a fraction of the amount needed to upgrade
the real
NHS
question.
system.
Shouldn't we be spending a lot more money protecting not just the NHS, but all sorts of institutions against these attacks?
And it's not just, I mean, in this case, it's a big and much loved on the whole public institution, the NHS, but we've seen previous cyber attacks. Private companies have been just as vulnerable, and their customers have had just as many problems. And a difficulty for all big organisations is cybercrime by its nature is quite nimble. And so, yeah, money may be part of it, but a lot of it may be just keeping ahead of the cyber criminals.
What's interesting about the fact that this has made such headlines is this has been happening to private companies and to large charities as well for years and years, but they haven't liked to admit it because it makes them look vulnerable.
And undermines public confidence.
Exactly. Now we all know that this has happened to the NHS. It's opening a can of worms as to what's happening.
And also, in fairness to the trusts, you know, the minute they say, if they said 6 months ago we're going to spend £5 billion on a computer, everyone's going to go, the NHS cut, you know,
what about my operation?
Yes. So, well, it might not take £5 billion because there's a great
There is a hero here in this
story. There is a hero, the 22-year-old surf dude. Nobody actually knows his name. His online handle is malware tech, but within a few hours, he says, he was able to find a way to save the NHS computers and to disable the malware, which is fascinating. They know he lives in the southwest of England and that he's a keen surfer, and he says it only took him a couple of hours, so maybe it won't take £5 billion to upgrade the entire
Maybe we just
system.
need a few more like that, guys, on the payroll.
A few teenagers.
Now, there's a ripple of expectation running through the country because we're going to turn to the general election coverage. Jane, you've got Sir Craig Oliver,
yes,
former David Cameron man.
Interestingly, his byline is just simple Craig Oliver, not Sir Craig.
Was he ashamed of the knighthood he got from his mate David Cameron?
He's done a piece saying that, you know, it's all very well for everyone to say it's a shoo-in for Theresa May, but actually, if you don't think the manifesto matters, you couldn't be more wrong. And he says that this week she's going to have to prove that she is on the side of the people and that what she said isn't just windy rhetoric. He says, of those in the picture, Theresa May is the last one truly standing, will be master of all she surveys on June the 9th. But her manifesto could be the route map between being seen as a great Prime Minister, or it could just be a bland document that puts safety first. So time will tell.
Interesting. Andrew, there are two different stories happening at the same time in terms of what's really going on in this election campaign. And the Mail on Sunday has a big poll by Michael Ashcroft, which suggests a vast Tory landslide.
Yes, we should say former Tory Treasury, but he had, as usual, the papers poll fairly intensively when you've got a campaign on. And indeed, yes, here we have the Mail on Sunday, which says it's a shock Mega poll reveals true scale of Labour collapse in North, putting PM on track for 172-seat landslide. Now, funnily enough, if you talk to Conservative campaigners, they would regard this story, I suspect, as deeply unhelpful, because one of the worries within Conservative high command gives the impression it's all over. Theresa May's just steamrolling away to a massive majority, and then they worry, will Conservative voters turn out? And maybe it'll make Labour supporters cross enough, whatever they might think of Jeremy Corbyn, maybe, to turn up.
Because the other side of this story is, if you look at most of the polling today, Labour is up above 30%, better than sometimes that Ed Miliband was doing, despite all the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn. It's not clear that Jeremy Corbyn, being out on the campaign trail, being seen more on television, is doing Labour any harm at all. Well,
the Sunday Mirror, as you say, Corbyn is closing gap, according to them, though they do add Tories still on top.
Here we are getting
and according to them,
about...
by 18-point lead. I mean, part of the problem is, and even the honest pollsters would probably say this candidly, we know they overestimated the Labour vote at the last general election.
Well, that's what I'm going to say.
Now, they've tried
to
correct.
Excited about the polls, because they're not very correct most of the time.
They've tried to correct. Now, have they overcorrected, and now are they underestimating the Labour vote, or have they not corrected enough, which would be really alarming for Labour, because it would mean they're doing even worse than the polls.
And everybody is really careful about polls now, but we're not exactly talking about somewhere where we're in the margin of error here, when you're talking about Labour having closed the lead to 18%.
No, I mean, they could be half wrong, and Mrs May would still be back in Downing Street.
Indeed. Now, Sarah, you've got a story on the tablet there, because, of course, there are the Scottish election is going on as well, and different manifestos in Scotland. And possibly one of the really big stars of the campaign so far has been Ruth Davidson.
Absolutely. Ruth Davidson is hoping to lead a Tory revival into Westminster. They've only got one seat in Westminster at the moment. They've got a private target of reaching 10 or 12 seats in Scotland, which would be remarkable. And the story in Scotland on Sunday today is that Ruth Davidson will announce a U-turn on prescription charges when they launch their Scottish manifesto. And this will be fascinating, because the UK Tory policy is still to charge for prescriptions. But in Scotland, they've been free. It was an SNP policy that the Labour Party voted for as well. Now the Conservatives are getting behind the idea, apparently, of free prescriptions, probably because they're trying to eat into the Labour vote. I mean, the election in Scotland is split very much between nationalists who support independence and will probably vote SNP, and then unionists on the other side. The Tories are very much hoping to say, we're the party of the union. If you don't want a referendum, vote for us. So they have to try and bring Labour and Liberal Democrat voters with them, with policies like this on free prescription charges that might attract them.
Very interesting. Let's move away from the election now, Jane, to the Rachel Nicholl murder. Was one of those sort of terrible, terrible moments that many of us remember from this time.
I remember this as if it was yesterday, and it was 25 years ago, astonishingly.
Richmond Park.
Yeah, and no, Wimbledon Common.
Wimbledon Common.
Wimbledon Common. Her son, who was there at the time, and it's very interesting, I think, also about trauma and toddlers, because he wasn't quite 3. You wondered how much of it he would have remembered, because he was there, obviously, when his mother was stabbed to death. And he says, the moment I watched my mother's soul leave her body is one I will never forget. He's written a book called Letting Go, a true story. And his father, if you remember, Andre, took him off to France, so he didn't become this sort of media sensation, which I think was probably a very good move. And what I find most fascinating about this is that a guy called Robert Napper went to prison for this murder. And he says, I forgive him. I forgive my mother's killer. He had a rough upbringing and childhood. He was a schizophrenic. He's tried to commit suicide. He said, I don't feel resentment.
And
I think that is remarkable. Yeah, it's a fascinating read.
Yeah. Very, very interesting indeed. Now, a bit of foreign politics, of course, because the other extraordinary story of the week was Trump sacking his FBI boss, and that extraordinary language he used. You are hereby terminated, he said.
Yes.
Absolutely amazing. And this is being compared to Watergate as one of the great Washington scandal moments unfolding.
It's an absolutely astonishing story that talks about, obviously, how Donald Trump sees the way he can use his presidency, what's happening with the FBI, the investigation into Russian hacking of the election. And the story that the Sunday Times have today is interesting. They said that the FBI chief, James Comey, who was sacked, is planning to strike back at Trump, giving interviews and possibly congressional testimony about why he was sacked. Now, what's fascinating, of course, is it was probably because of congressional testimony he gave in the first place that Trump sacked him when he called him a showboat and a grandstand.
And in the United States, especially when, Congress gets interested in doing investigations, and Democrats particularly, but also some Republicans have an interest in pursuing this. The process just takes over, and you get endless investigations, inquiries, and people keep pulling at the threads until things unravel. I mean, that's a large part of the story of Watergate.
And it takes a while. I mean, you
We
mentioned Watergate. It was a year between the president sacking the special prosecutor and finally having to resign. This could play out over quite a long time.
And meanwhile, Trump has issued this extraordinary, menacing warning that Coney had better hope that there aren't tapes of their conversations, as if he has been taping what's going on in the White House so that he can use it against his enemies.
That does, of course, reek of
it does.
Richard Nixon. We're not saying Donald Trump's Richard Nixon at the moment, but it does reek of that era, doesn't it?
Absolutely
Tapes of phone
What's
calls.
really interesting as well about it, I think, is it shows you, as you see Trump just doing what he wants, sacking the FBI director when he feels like it. The American Constitution that we thought could constrain the powers of a president like this, it can't. It's just the norms of politics
Nothing
that
can
do that.
constrain Donald.
Back to earth with a bump and supermarket prices, a story in the Sun now.
Yes, I mean, in this election campaign, we're going to have lots of figures which may or may not be very dodgy from politicians, and forecasts that prove to be completely untrue. For a lot of people, they feel the economy in their weekly shopping basket. I hear the Sun on Sunday headlines this quite wittily, I think, warning unexpected price hike in the bagging area. And it reports that supermarkets have raised prices of their own brand products by up to 160% in the last year. Now, what the Sun doesn't mention, because it was pro-Brexit, of course, that this might have something to do with the slide in the value of sterling since Britain voted to leave the European Union.
Or it could just be supermarkets being generally naughty.
It could be that. But anyway, warning, the price of your foodstuffs in the shops is going up by quite a lot.
Finishing off with the voice of the Sun, fizzy water.
Yes, well,
a very worrying
as a
story for us all.
self-confessed enophile, which I discovered this means a lover of wine, on the very few occasions that I do drink something non-alcoholic, I go for fizzy water because I think, oh, how virtuous am I? No calories, blah. No, fizzy water apparently makes you fat. Now,
I can't understand how that could be.
It's a weird thing, but it's because the carbonation makes you want to eat more. It stimulates your appetite. So it's not the actual product, but it makes you want to eat more.
Stick to the wine in future.
Yes.
Stick to the wine.
Some people are still enjoying breakfast, so we'll leave it there. Very much indeed.
Let's have a look at what's on the front pages this morning. The Mail on Sunday claims England's hospitals were hit by 66 cyber attacks last year, but none were reported to police. The Sunday Telegraph says thousands of patients will be affected as it will take several weeks to fix the computer systems hit by the attack. The Sunday Times leads on Theresa May's attempt to woo Labour voters with a pledge to boost house building. And that story is also in the Sunday Express. They say the Prime Minister is on course to win a majority of 147 seats in the election. A millionaire donor behind the Brexit victory is now funding a campaign to oust Remain backing MPs. That's in The Observer. And the Sun on Sunday claims Wayne Rooney lost £500,000 in just 2 hours at a casino. Well, to talk about those stories and lots more, we're joined in the studio now by the construction entrepreneur Julie White, the political editor of the Sun on Sunday, David Wooding, and the former Labour advisor, Ayesha Hazarika. Hello to all of you. Nice to see you. Well, we've just had the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell on talking about that Robin Hood tax, the idea about financial transactions, that tax in the city. Ayesha, for someone who's worked really closely with the Labour Party for a long time, what do you make of this? Is it good politics?
I think it's good Labour politics. I mean, from the leaks we've seen of the manifesto, it's a manifesto which is kind of lots of old-time religion for the left of the Labour Party, but actually a lot of the policies are quite popular with people. They like the idea, if you've been blighted by Southern Rail, you quite like the idea of the railways being nationalised. The Robin Hood tax is interesting because this is not a new idea. This is something that actually people have been campaigning for a long time, including not just MPs on the Corbyn wing of the party. Someone like Rachel Reeves has campaigned for a long time about this as well. The question is how much people are going to listen to the goodies that they hear in the manifesto, and how much are they going to question how is this going to be paid for and is it going to be delivered. I think in a way I have a lot of respect for the Corbyn team for the fact that they have come out with a manifesto which basically is pure Corbynism. It's let Corbyn be Corbyn. One of the things that people have been critical about the Labour Party in the past and other political parties is you can't tell the difference between the two parties and the manifesto. Well, you cannot say that about the Labour Party right now. This election will be a clear choice between two very different sort of political ideologies, and I guess we'll know on the June the 9th about how successful it's been.
I mean, the timing of it, I think, is the kind of question as well, isn't it, with the Robin Hood tax? We've got Brexit looming.
Yeah, is it right for business right now with Brexit looming behind us? And also we've got to think that business, you know, they employ people pay taxes. That those taxes pay for everything in the country.
And you might not like the banks very much, but they do contribute an awful lot to the exchequer.
Yeah. So is it the right time to announce something like that? Is it, you know, give us more uncertainty with the Brexit?
What do you think about the policy idea about minimum wage of £10? Do you think that's a good?
Well, that really goes what Corbyn would like to do. That's the kind of people he's going for, and that issue. I mean, for businesses, you know, it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. There's a lot of people out there that like minimum wage, they like just the, you know, the being able to work when they want to. So really, it can work and it cannot be sometimes.
Let's talk about this extraordinary story on the Sun on Sunday and a couple of other papers as well. This is the tech hero who halted the NHS virus attack. So we owe this guy quite a lot, don't we, David Wooding?
Yes. Well, this is the fascinating human side of this NHS story, which has been dominating the headlines for the last couple of days. And it seems it's a computer whiz kid, aged 22, one of these guys who was signed up by the National Cyber Agency. As those of us over a certain age will know, it's all the young people who know how to use these gadgets, which change by the day.
The interweb. The interweb.
Internet, as they say up north. But this young lad finds a way to save this and prevents 100,000 new infections. Basically, it sounds very techie, but he found where the domains that were being contacted by the virus, then bought up that domain for £8. And for the princely sum of £8, he saved this disaster. Now, of course, it is a bad disaster. 48 NHS trusts have been infected out of 250, I think. But he has saved, undoubtedly, further damage.
£8 well spent.
What a hero.
I think he deserves a gong.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we were,
maybe nominated.
Should be there.
And we were talking about this, sort of saying that the National Health is such a huge organisation. Are they moving with the times? You know, the trust takes so much time to make a decision. Are they actually moving quick enough?
And the question is, were the systems updated and all the kind of anti-spyware and all that sort of thing?
Now, it's not just Labour, of course, who are kind of pumping policies into the papers before the election. We've got this from Theresa May saying a council house revolution would happen if the Conservatives win. That's the front page of the Sunday Times. Jeannie, what do you think about this?
Well, it's good for construction, but...
Oh, yeah, I bet you're happy.
Oh, yes, but it's very ambitious. You know, if we look back 2015, there was 150,000 homes built that year. So she wants, 1 million homes built before 2022. Is it right? Can we do it? We haven't got the infrastructure to join these places up. They're talking about, is there enough brownfield sites, you know, to actually build these on? And also, you know, that nobody wants to touch the green belts because it's not good for voting.
And we always hear this, don't we, from politicians about the need for more house building. And then, of course, I mean, Ed Miliband, it sounds very Ed Miliband.
No, absolutely. Yet another policy from the Ed Miliband locker. But look, housing is a huge issue right across the country, people, particularly in the south, but right across the country. All parties come forward and say, look, we're going to do something. It is worth pointing out that actually affordable housing is at a 24-year low. Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric. Is it matched by what's happening on the ground? And particularly with Brexit coming down the track as well, who's going to build all these houses as well in terms of once we've sorted it?
And can the planning system keep up? Because the problem is right at the bottom. It's the councils, it's the planners. They're not keeping up with it. They're just taking their time, you know, not passing sites as quick as they should. So really it starts right from the bottom.
I'm really interested as well in the wider interview that Theresa May's given to Tim Shipman, particularly in the quickfire round. She was kind of asked all these questions, you know, which TV shows she sort of prefers, flats or heels, and she was kind of on the fence on a lot of them.
I said strong and stable a lot.
I feel his pain. I mean, I interviewed her in September, and you did an early interview with her too, Sophie, and she uses the word strong 12 times in the first 15 minutes.
We're going to have a bet
stable and leadership 5 times.
Yeah.
But the best line appears to have come from another minister who said that she's a Ron Seal PM who who does what it says on the tin.
So the headline didn't even come from
Britain.
That's actually a very good point.
I love the fact in the One Show interview they said something like, so what was your upbringing like? And she was like, stable.
I was waiting for them to describe their marriage.
Yeah, that's right. And for men taking out the bins.
Yes, I'm going to do that straight after the show, ladies.
And for women to take us out.
Do you do the boy jobs in your house?
I do the boy job. I do all the boy jobs.
He does all the jobs.
Yes.
I'm going to go to a course to learn how to switch on the vacuum cleaner.
Well, there's the token man on our panel.
Yes, that's right, the quota.
And learn all these things.
There's another lovely bit in the interview where she's talking about who. Tim Shipman asks her who does the washing up, and she says, "Oh, we have a dishwasher," and then corrects herself and says, "I mean a machine." She was obviously worried that people would think she had some kind of dishwasher like
under £10 an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Perhaps not on the minimum wage there. Very interesting interview. And then it feels like we should finish with this story here about northern accents. Dave Wooding, I understand why you this one. What's this all about?
Well, this is an attractive young actress or model who's appeared on the new Tesco adverts, and she's from my part of the world, Merseyside. And she only had a few words to say, which were, I only came in for ice cream. And when she saw the advert go on the TV, it wasn't her voice. It should have said, "I only come in for ice cream," but in fact it says, "I only come in for ice cream."
Because she was from the Marks and Spencer's advert.
She was dubbed, and it really is. I mean, you know, joking apart, it's an insult to northern people.
Yes.
Why can't we have northern accents?
Exactly. Why can't we hear more like different accents? Why does everything have to sort of be the same in a sort of, you know, southern kind of middle class accent? I think we do definitely need a bit of diversity.
We're not doing very well on this today, David, are we? With our accents?
No, we're not.
This is a good thing.
Sky's always been quite good at having accents.
Yes,
it wouldn't have me on otherwise.
I used to have a Sheffield accent when I was little, actually.
Really?
Yeah,
Did you?
I did.
Did you have elocution lessons?
No, I think it's just, you know, when you go to school and then you realise you talk differently to everyone else, then pretty quickly iron out any differences. It's very funny. So do you think there was a bit of accent snobbery?
Definitely. When we were in the green room, I said Bath instead of Bath, and people looked at me. I said, "I mean Bath," you know. So there is some change. But
and I think in politics it's a big thing as well. Like one of the big issues is a lot of people say, look, why are there not more sort of people that look like me and sound like me in politics? And it's interesting, particularly in the Labour Party, there's quite a few politicians that are doing well, like Angela Rayner, for example, you know, very, very strong accent. And people like it. People like to hear accents that are different and represent like different parts.
The other interesting thing about this, right at the end, is it says, in England, you'll hate this as a Scottish person as well, in England and Scotland, they use the posh received pronunciation, but when they put the ad out in Northern Ireland, they use an Irish accent.
Oh, really?
Isn't that interesting?
So we should be dubbing in Scotland and Wales and North, everywhere.
I'm going to check when I get home to make sure there's no subtitles underneath.
Yeah. They also say that people trust a regional accent more, don't they? They sort of say that.
It's interesting. Some accents are the kind of more popular ones than others. I loved your impressions, by the way, Dave. Back to do some more of those.
Might get on the Tesco advert next time.
Thanks very much for your thoughts on today's newspaper stories. Much appreciated.
Watcher. Now, when his draft manifesto was leaked, was that a brilliant and cunning plan or a shambles on steroids? Of course, she said it showed he wasn't strong and stable enough. Oh, no one saw that coming. But it achieved something he and his shadow chancellor have failed to do for months. That's get everyone talking about their policies, which are, surprise, to spend a colossal amount more on public services, do a bit of nationalisation, put up taxes for the rich and transfer power to trade unions. However, in France, it was vive la différence when they elected a president rather more in the mould of a past Labour leader than the current one. Now, here is our country's future. It's Xanthi, newly arrived daughter of our very own Allegra. Anushka, Skrini, all together now. Isn't she lovely?
She is gorgeous. Congratulations, Allegra. Hopefully you are not worrying too much about that NHS cyber attack that is on the front of a number of newspapers, including the Sunday Telegraph. And they have a Labour policy here, a £26 billion tax on city deals. Now, let me show you the Sunday Times as well, because they have two massive interviews. Harry Styles thinks Brexit is going in the wrong direction. Harry, if you're out there, why don't you comment on our David Davis interview later? Another interview with Theresa May. Apparently she is the Ron Seal Prime Minister, does what it says on the tin, and the tin today says a council house revolution. It's a bit Maggie Thatcher in terms of right to buy, but it also sounds a little bit Jeremy Corbyn. And I must tell you, there have been a flurry of bets on the idea of Prime Minister Corbyn this week. Could it be that leaked Labour manifesto? Now, critics say it is a 1970s throwback, but look how popular some of these policies are. This is abolishing tuition fees. These are those nationalisations. Both of them have the support of almost half of people. Far fewer think it is going in the wrong direction. And raising the money, 58% of people very relaxed about slapping more tax on those earning over 80 grand. But it is not all a bed of roses for Labour. Raising taxes on businesses, not so popular. And the idea of not leaving the EU if there is no trade deal, people are saying no thanks. Robert.
Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by the Conservative MP Nadine Dorries and Labour's Shadow Health Secretary John Ashworth. I want to start with this extraordinary cyber attack on companies and public services all over the world, but it's been a particular problem for the NHS, Nadine. Now, the vulnerability is to do with the fact that many hospitals are still running a software programme that was introduced in 2001. Now, you know, you've been in power since 2010. This is your failure, isn't it?
Well, no, not at all, because we've invested £1.9 billion in enhanced cyber security. We've put the money in.
So why hasn't it been used to protect this vital service?
Well, I think one of the problems is that Microsoft themselves were almost holding companies to ransom by demanding this £5 billion to enhance these particular services, and the patch to increase this, the Windows XP to the new operating system. But, you know, we've put the money in. There's GCHQ is a world leader in cybersecurity. We've done what we could. Individual Health Trust had a responsibility to upgrade their systems. But, you know, you're quite right. The count this morning is 156 countries, 156 major countries with major organisations, health services. This just isn't an attack on the NHS and the UK, which is kind of how it's being portrayed. This is a big problem worldwide this morning.
It's obviously a worldwide problem, but, you know, the public service which has suffered worst, I think, globally is the NHS. John, is Nadine right that this is all Microsoft's fault?
No, I think the government have been rather complacent when people have warned about a cybersecurity attack on the NHS. So I would say to the government today, publish the Department of Health's risk register so we'll know how seriously the government were taking potential cyber attack risks. If the Conservative Prime Minister thinks they were taking it seriously, then she shouldn't have any problem in publishing that register. But more generally, I'm afraid we've seen huge investment cuts in the infrastructure of the NHS. In the last year, £1 billion taken out of infrastructure in order to plug wider gaps in the NHS. So what I'm saying today is that a Labour government will put £10 billion into the infrastructure needs of the NHS, and a big priority of that will go to investing in cybersecurity and upgrading our IT.
Why would people trust you? Why would people trust you when your government wasted £10 billion on a failed NHS IT service?
Well, with respect...
Why would they trust you to do that?
With respect, you can either invest in the NHS or you can cut the NHS next year, which is the Conservative Party's policy.
Well, look, there's so much more to pick up on with the two of you later.